Hello and welcome to the final video on my T-72M4CZ. In this video I will do the painting and weathering. I start by priming the model, and for this I use Tamiya XF1 Black. Next I paint the base colour using XF67 NATO Green. After this I apply the second camouflage colour using XF67 again, this time mixed with XF4 Yellow Green. For fine detail work like this I use a 0.2mm airbrush. For the third camouflage colour I made a dark grey colour using XF1 and XF2. I wanted to try and copy the process that Night Shift used on his BMR3M, so I added some pre-shading with XF61 and XF64 around all the edges and details. Then I used lighter tones of the base colours to go over the shading and add more variation to the camouflage. I found that the check rounders in the kit were too big, so I decided to make my own using masking tape. First I cut out a circle, placed it in the position I wanted the marking and sprayed it white. Next I apply more tape to cover the part of the roundel that is white and spray it all red. Then I repeat that for the final colour, blue. In some of the reference pictures that I found, I saw that there were some faded brown chevrons that had been painted onto the sides and top of the turret. To recreate this I made more masks and painted a thin layer of brown over them. Then I applied chipping fluid, followed by another layer of brown. After this I used water to activate the chipping fluid to create a slightly faded look to the markings. Next I sprayed a couple of layers of Vallejo gloss varnish over the entire model. I left it to dry for a day, then I added the decals. To prepare the area where I will place the decal I use Mr. Mark Setter. Once it's in place I use microsol to soften it. Using a lighter shade of the base colour I highlight some of the small details. After this I spray 2 coats of Vallejo silk varnish over the entire model. I create a mud texture from sand, water, plaster and brown pigments. This is put onto the lower hull and wheels and blended with the water. Next I apply 2 layers of chipping fluid and then spray some very diluted XF57 buff plus XF52 flat earth in the areas where there would be dust. Then I activate the chipping fluid with water and move the brush in vertical motion to create a streaked and faded look. After this I use acrylics to paint the machine gun and other smaller details. Using enamels, I apply a wash over all of the surface details. To remove the excess, I use a brush and cotton bud with odourless thinner. For the mantlet cover, I first paint it with Vallejo acrylic tan earth. Then I add highlights with tan earth plus buff. For the shadows, I use tan earth plus black grey. After this, I use a very thin mixture of tan earth plus black grey and keep painting thin layers until the highlights and shadows are blended with the base colour. For the glass and clear parts, I paint them the colour I want, then I use wet effects to make them shiny. I noticed that I had missed some parts on the turret, so I added them here. Next I started doing the chipping. To do this I used a sponge to add light chips, then I connected some with a brush before finally adding the metal colour underneath. For the fuel tanks and storage boxes I used Vallejo steel. For the other metal parts I used Vallejo black grey plus hull red. And for the rubber parts I used black grey and white. For the tracks I randomly apply some XF72 brown. For the wheels I first paint the outside of the rubber a medium grey using oil paints, then I remove some towards the centre using a cotton bud moistened with odourless thinner. Finally I use a sponge with black grey acrylic paint and apply it to the centre. For a while now I've been trying to find a good mud texture without having to buy some pre-made mixes. Now I have found a way that I am quite happy with. To make it, I use pigment powders for the colour I want, then I add water and acrylic thinner. Finally, I add very fine silica sand to create the texture. The end result is a realistic mud texture that dries hard and is cheap and easy to make. This mixture is applied over the lower hull, tracks and wheels and blended with water. Once the mud is dried, I glue the wheels and tracks in place. I paint the tow cables and spare track links with black grey. Then I continue with chipping the rubber parts. I mix the same coloured pigments that I use for the mud paste with water and Tamiya thinner, then apply them to the bottom and sides of the tank, blending them with water to create streaks. After this, I use wet effects to create darker areas of mud on the wheels and tracks. This was blended with odourless thinner. I rubber pencil against some of the exposed metal parts of the tracks. Using a brush and stick, I speckle on more of the same mud paint mixture. I paint the end of the barrel with Vallejo steel. I used a pencil against some of the edges and details on the turret machine gun. Next, I started creating the antenna. In the references I'd seen, the bottom half was bigger than the top, so to make it I used two different sizes of metal tube. The top of the antenna had a small round ball. To recreate this, I used a blob of CA glue. The antenna was painted with Vallejo black grey. To replicate the smoke effects, I used a 0.2mm airbrush with Tamiya black. I used some pre-made oil and fuel effects around the fuel tanks. In some of the reference pictures, I saw that the front ERA blocks had some black tape on them. To copy this, I used some masking tape that was cut to size and painted black. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel.